Hello and welcome to the American Council on Exercise live webinar continuing education series. My name is Jackie Crockford and I will be your host for today's live presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are able to view us right now, you're watching live via YouTube. We do have a chat bar on the YouTube page. You can use that chat bar to type in any questions or comments throughout the presentation. We will be taking questions for our presenter at a few different points throughout today's presentation. So be sure to use that chat bar if you have questions during today's live webinar. If you would like to receive CECs for today's presentation, you can use the link provided on the screen. That's acefitness.org/past webinars. In the next 48 hours, the recorded version of this presentation will be on our website at that link, and you can purchase it. And once you pass the quiz, you will receive 0.1 CECs within your MyAce account. All right, let's get started with today's course. Welcome to the ACE Continuing Education Series. Today's course is Nutrition Coaching, Changing Habits, Not Diets. My name is Jackie Crockford and I will be your host for today's presentation. Our presenter for today is Justin Robinson.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Great.
Good, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So Justin, we've worked with you before, a couple different points, and we're going to be talking about nutrition, which is, you are a registered dietitian, so that's really your wheelhouse, but we're going to be getting into a little bit of a different topic with regard to nutrition today. Tell us a little bit about that.
So with behavior change, it's that common denominator across any aspect of fitness. Nutrition, health, your exercise routine, your sleep, it's all about behavior change. And in order to be an effective dietitian, an effective strength and conditioning coach, an effective personal trainer, you don't have to be a behavior specialist, but you should know something about why people make decisions, and you should know something about how to coach them through some behavior changes so that they can get those desired results.
Great. So we're going to be talking about that behavior change. We're also going to be talking about some of the hot topics in nutrition today. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be taking some questions throughout today's presentation. So be sure and use that chat bar and type in your questions as we go through. So let's start with the learning objectives today.
All right. So for today, we're going to discuss what's called the habit loop. And a lot of what I'm going to discuss today comes from the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I have no investment in the book. It was something, as I was reading through it, he was describing me and why. I'm like, yes, I do that. And he was describing every client I've ever worked with. So the book is not about nutrition or fitness at all, but I feel we can definitely glean a lot from it in terms of what we do as health practitioners. So we'll go through the habit loop as he describes it. We'll talk a lot about awareness and how that should be the first step in creating nutritional behavior change. So we'll essentially funnel things down. We'll start off really broad with behavior change, and then we'll definitely get into some specifics about nutritional change.
Great.
And then one of my goals as a trainer, as a coach, is to make sure that when people leave my office, that they have 2 or 3 keys, 2 or 3 goals that they can focus on instantaneously. And so we'll get into a couple of those habits.
Great, sounds good. So in talking about these habits, we're going to be talking about them as in kind of a loop, a circular structure. So one thing happens, then the next thing, which leads to the thing, and then it keeps
starts
going
all
around
over
and
again.
around. So talk to us about this habit loop and how we want to be thinking about it for behavior change. Great
Question. So the habit loop has 3 components that we'll get into a little bit more, but they feed each other. Most of the decisions, or about half the decisions we make every day, are not actually decisions. They're habits. And a habit, the difference between the two is that the brain wants to chunk activities together. The brain has a constant need to conserve energy, conserve effort. So it'll lump things together and it'll call that a habit. So brushing your teeth in the morning. We don't consciously open the cabinet, take out the toothbrush, open up the lid. We just go through, we brush our teeth.
Right.
When we back up our car out of the driveway in the morning, we're not thinking about, okay, check the mirror, okay, seatbelt's buckled. We get in the car and we go. So we conserve energy by lumping these things together in habits. So it is that cue There's a cue for every routine. There is a reward for every routine, and that reward feeds the cue again. So it essentially creates a craving in some cases for that cue, and then that's why it's very, very cyclical.
Great. So some of these cues that we're talking about, what might be examples of some of these cues when it comes to creating this kind of the start of this habit loop?
Great. So let's get into a couple examples of that. One of them being our phones. Yeah. So I know that when I'm at my computer, if my phone is there next to me, I'm going to pick it up 5 or 6 times an hour. And the baseball trade deadline is coming up, the Tour de France is going on. So all of this, I want that information. And the cue to me isn't necessarily that, oh, wait, I wonder if anything's happened in the last 6 minutes since the last time I checked it. But just the visual of my phone being there makes me, without thinking, do this. Now, I know that if my phone is a few feet away charging, I can just go through and get work done and not think about checking my phone.
So in that case, the cue is that the phone is sitting there.
The presence of the phone is the cue in that particular case. Email, if you have an email system where it pops up and the little ping comes on, we crave that, we want that. And the second that pops up, even if we're in the middle of something important, we click on that because we crave that distraction. So that distraction of the email is one of the habits that we've become ingrained with.
And then the cue for that one would be that actual sort of notification.
Precisely.
That it's ready and that there's something there and please click on me now.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And then we get that instant gratification, we get that distraction, and so that's going to be the reward.
Okay.
A more obvious reward is something like food. And food that tastes good, sugary foods. We have that, we call it a craving, but sometimes it's not necessarily a true craving. There's another cue that's leading to that craving. You probably don't crave candy when you're walking through the mall until you see the candy store, and you're like, yeah, I could go for some sour gummy worms right now. That sounds really good because we know that's been ingrained into us in that loop.
Right. So in talking about these cues, and you mentioned the food, becoming aware of that cue actually even existing, right? Being aware that the sour gummy worms are calling to us from across the mall. Creating that awareness is kind of part of the first step, right?
It is absolutely the first step. So to take you, for example, Jackie, I know we were chatting as we were practicing for this a little bit, but what would you say is something that is maybe hindering you in terms of your ideal fitness? I know you're in shape, you look great, but what's maybe that holding you back from that last 5 to 10%?
So, I mean, one of the things that I probably do and maybe shouldn't do, and maybe a lot of your clients do it as well, I do enjoy the snacking at night, before I go to bed, watching TV or just kind of winding down. Sometimes I'm hungry because I'm training a lot, but sometimes I think it's probably just out of boredom and a little bit of a habit.
And so you're exactly right, and that's the first step, is to understand why that snacking is occurring. What is the cue, the trigger for that? Is it hunger? And if it is, that's great, because late night snacking in itself is not necessarily bad, because you could need the fuel, you could choose healthy foods, it could help you sleep, help you train harder the next day, or you could be bored, or it could just be, when I eat this particular dinner, this is the dessert or the late night snack that I always have. So yes, the first step is to understand what you're doing and then why you're doing it. And in terms of how to achieve that, that's where I feel journaling is incredibly effective. So one of the first steps would be to journal, not necessarily to get after that information and calculate the carbs, fats, and proteins and vitamins and minerals. That's helpful information, but I want to get after the journaling for the habits. So that we can assess, okay, what's going on? And so when you're eating late at night, I would write down what's going on in your mind, how you're feeling, what you did earlier in the day. So we could look at that from a snapshot and say, okay, this is what is guiding you to that late night snack. And here are the days you choose better snacks. Here are the days you choose less healthy snacks. And where's that discrepancy and how do we fix it?
Right. So journaling creates an awareness for the cue that's leading us to this habit that we maybe want to change. Right. So let's talk a little bit more about that awareness piece.
All right. So once you, quote, you can see on the screen here, once you recognize what's going on, that's like G.I. Joe said, that's half the battle, all right? Knowing is half the battle. So what we want to do is identify the routine. So late night snacking, again, let's journal. Let's figure out what's going on prior to those late night snacks, and then what some of those are. Experimenting with different rewards. So the reward is the happy center in our brain. We know from sugar, it turns on a portion of the brain. There's some recent evidence that the cell phone and the email triggers that exact same portion of the brain. Yeah. Narcotics and other drugs hit those centers as well. So experimenting with different rewards, maybe, all right, instead of getting the sugar fix, maybe I'm going to try to get an exercise fix or go out and get some physical activity. Isolating the cue, which we've already gone over, is, okay, what is the true trigger to me making these series of routines? And then coming up with a plan. And this is where working with a coach can become important. This is where creating SMART goals can become important, so that you can create your action plan of how to move forward.
Right. So creating those SMART goals and having a plan, that's kind of the coach's role, is sort of facilitating that with the client's input and buy-in and helping them to understand that it's kind of their idea, right?
Exactly. And when you have that buy-in from the client, when it is their idea, they're much more likely to follow through with something. So yes, the action plan is something that you come up with together. Right. You are facilitating them coming up with ideas that will trigger and foster better habits.
Right. So let's talk about this just a little bit more, how we get to that place of establishing the plan and getting to, understanding, how we can make a little bit of that change. And I know that we've talked about the Alcoholics Anonymous as being an example of changing a little bit of the habit once we recognize and have that awareness of the cue that we need.
Exactly. So what we want to try to do is insert a new routine into old habits. Okay. So with Alcoholics Anonymous, to use that example, what they do is they replace alcohol, actually the form of drinking, with socializing. Because the question is, well, okay, do I really crave a drink, or do I crave some sort of interaction? Or can a social interaction give me that same reward, that same feeling that alcohol does? So I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed, I go for a drink. Or I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed, I go to a meeting. And I talk to other people who are in the same situation as me, and I feel better afterward. Right. So chewing gum with smokers is another form of replacing that specific habit or that specific routine. Another thing I wanted to touch on with this is temporary changes versus long-term changes, and how we can use up a lot of willpower, really essentially forcing ourselves to eliminate a cue or to change the reward, and this is why we need to change that routine instead. Think about a 30-day challenge. January 1st. No alcohol, no sugar for the month of January. No junk food. What do you do February 1st?
Go out.
Right, we're getting pizza.
We're getting pizza and beer.
Pizza and beer, right? Yeah. And using up that willpower, just forcing yourself and self-discipline, it takes up a ton of energy. Willpower is like a muscle, that if you exercise it a lot early in the day, then you're not going to have much left over in the tank later in the day. So think about, and then we're going to talk about keystone habits in the next few slides and the value of those in conserving your willpower. Because think about the times where you come home from work and you're tired, and maybe you worked out, so you're underfueled, you're hungry, you're thirsty, and you don't have dinner planned. That's where the bag of chips and the jar of salsa occur. And then that mindless eating. And so let's talk about some of those. Let's summarize here first, and then let's get into some of those keystone habits and why those foster a new culture. So habits we can't just get rid of them. We have to replace them with something else. And as I said, the brain likes to chunk things together to conserve that effort. Being part of a group, we've talked very briefly about health coaching and finding a coach, but a workout partner or a workout group. I know you're a coach and you've coached groups, and so when you have that half marathon training group, you're much more likely to show up and have the accountability for the Saturday and the Tuesday workouts or whatever they may be. And then you have to have that belief system. And that's two parts. That's belief from the client and then belief from the coach.
Right.
So we have to, as you said, foster their belief system, foster their self-efficacy, and look them in the eye and truthfully say, you can do this. You can make this change.
Great. So let's get into some of those keystone habits, as you mentioned. And I know this is from the book that we were referencing today. And those references are actually included at the end of today's presentation, so you'll have those available to you. But as you can see on the slide, we have a quote from James Prochaska, who's responsible for this kind of behavior change model and those 5 stages of behavior change, which we'll get into. And so let's start talking about some of these keystone habits.
Absolutely. So when you begin an exercise program, that is a keystone habit, exercising itself, because it spills over, as he said, and that people who begin an exercise program are more likely to eat better, they're more productive, smoke less, drink less. And so when we have these keystone habits, they create additional healthy habits. They change your individual culture or the culture of a team or organization. The book uses the example of a new CEO who came into a company was starting to tank, and he got up there day one and said, we're going to focus on safety. And everyone's like, how is safety going to make us more money? But because they had a new safety program and because they got buy-in from the individuals who worked there, they created a new culture, they created new systems that eventually led to better worker productivity, and we know that leads to more efficient use of funds,
right,
and
better
products,
yep.
better business. Exactly. Yeah. So it seems there may be a few steps removed, but you could also look at the example of parking far away in a parking lot.
Okay.
And
something that we probably tell our clients a lot, right?
Exactly. Get those extra 30 steps in and 30 steps back, and that'll burn more calories and help you lose fat. Well, we know that by doing the math, those 30 extra steps don't contribute to weight loss themselves. But the people who park farther in a parking lot are the same type of people who probably take the stairs more often, who go to their doctor more regularly, have better oral hygiene, better overall hygiene, eat better. So it's a series of associative habits. It's not necessarily a causal relationship of do this one thing and this other thing will happen. It's, hey, do this one thing, and then you start doing a bunch of these other little things, and collectively, that helps you lose more weight, become more fit,
right,
become healthier.
Great. And those keystone habits are really kind of the catalyst, as a different way to put it, a catalyst for sort of spreading out and providing an environment for change throughout maybe the rest of the person's life or other communities or their family. Exactly.
So within family, the information was on the previous slide, but families who sit down and eat dinner together have more productive children. The children do better in school. They're better contributing members of society. And it's not the fact that they ate dinner, but the parents who cook a meal as a family, eat a meal as a family, are maybe more likely to read books at night, ask their children how things are going at school, help them with homework. All those other things definitely factor together, and as you said, spread out and create that culture change. What I feel is important to discuss, and this comes from the ACE Behavior Change certification manual, the weight loss specialist, that big change equals small change plus time. And it's very, very, again, being the instant gratification folks that we are, you don't just wake up and run a marathon.
Right.
You wake up and you do a 30-minute walk jog, and then you take 2 days off because you're so sore. And so we have to focus on the progressive change in order to get that really big long-term change, and that comes from that series of small wins, series of keystone habits.
Great. Then those spread out and start to create that environment for change to take place, and the environment for clients to sort of be aware of what's happening and how they can change it themselves.
Right.
Right. So let's get into talking about that environment and creating that environment for change, and maybe let's start with things that don't work.
Great question there. So some of these things that don't work are very intuitive.
Okay.
Let's scare people into making a change. Let's scare them into telling that if you eat that donut, you're going to get heart disease. And people will just look at you, grab the donut as they put it into their face because it's so distant.
Right.
The heart disease, diabetes, those are 20 to 50-year diseases to develop. So it's very difficult for us to make that connection of, if I smoke this one cigarette, if I eat this one donut now, then I'm going to get heart disease later. So fear doesn't work because fear initiates a stress response. And how do smokers, for example, deal with stress?
They want to smoke.
They light up a cigarette. Another strategy that is incredibly ineffective is shaming.
Okay.
And so we've seen the TV shows where the trainer will look at the person who's 100 or 150 pounds overweight and point the finger and say, how could you do this to yourself? How could you let yourself go? You're such and such. And that may increase short-term motivation. That may be a good motivator for an hour-long workout. But in the course of time, it's going to have a very negative effect. So shaming, guilt tripping is each of those incredibly ineffective. Another book, The Upside of Stress, and the authors quoted here, summarize that in a lot of the research, in that when we fat shame, for example, that does not facilitate any long-term weight loss. So it's difficult because we don't want to be on the opposite end of the spectrum and be like, Jackie, you're going to make a change when you are good and ready to make a change, and I'm here to help when you need that. That's probably too soft of a touch in that case. And sometimes clients, as we know, do need a kick in the pants. But scaring them and fat shaming them are not the effective methods of initiating that long-term change.
Right. So what are some things that are going to work? And specifically, we're talking today a little bit about nutrition, and we'll get into those kind of key nutritional tactics a little bit later. But let's talk about what does work for those clients that maybe need that little extra nudge or are coming to us as professionals, as a registered dietitian or a health coach, and saying, look, I know I need to do this. What now?
Exactly. So the first step, I feel, is to understand the person. And this is podcasts I've been listening to recently, books I've been reading. It's a lot more about understanding the person, because any coach can write an effective strength training program. It's not easy, but that is the easy part of putting together a comprehensive program.
Right.
Understanding the person in those steps of building rapport, gaining trust, just understanding where they're at in terms of their own readiness to make a change, their current level of motivation, their current cumulative stress, and then how we can facilitate that. So we're probably all vaguely familiar with the stages of change model, assessing somebody's readiness to change. So that's that first step. Awareness, assessing their readiness to change, and then just nudging them down a little bit. So if somebody is not even considering making a change, then handing them a meal plan or a workout program is not going to work.
Right.
But asking them questions like, have you considered this? Have you considered that? And if they say, no, I haven't thought about that, then that's your target for the day. That is your small win for that session.
Just to have them consider it. Just
move
to have
the meter
them,
a few inches.
Yeah,
exactly.
Coming from, if we look at the 5 stages of change, which you can see on your slide, moving a client from pre-contemplation, where they're not thinking about anything at all. Maybe they were sent to us from a doctor or a spouse or a friend, just moving it for a little bit from pre-contemplation to, that's interesting to think about.
Exactly. And sometimes people are in pre-contemplation.
Right.
That's not even on their radar at all. And your goal is to get it onto their radar. And I know that I say we as personal trainers and strength conditioning coaches and dietitians, we're very results-oriented, very numbers-oriented. So we want to get after the calculating things out, but we have to back ourselves up a little bit. And that, if nothing else, if you get nothing else out of today, that's probably the big target, is focus on awareness, focus on where that person is, and let's just make progressive but permanent changes.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about something that we can do with our clients, and we're going to talk a little bit about motivational interviewing and sort of the steps to go through with helping them to develop this process of changing that cue and understanding where they're at.
So motivational interviewing, And with the readiness to change model, a lot of that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a larger aspect of the field of psychology and social work that's been very effective in substance abuse change. And so we've pulled from that and tweaked the model a little bit to make it fit for fitness. And you can become certified in motivational interviewing. It's a very regimented technique. I don't follow all 5 steps every consult, but I pull at least 1 or 2 every single time.
Right. And
so the first step is expressing some form of empathy. And again, I think a lot of this comes from asking them questions. So what's a common thread that we see?
So I think a lot of times, and maybe you guys have experienced this, those that are watching, clients will come in and say, you know, I've been trying to do this, I've been trying to lose weight, I've been trying to eat better, and I just want to get the last 5 or 10 pounds, or I just want to lose the last 5% body fat of where I used to be. So that maybe is a common thing of, I'm here, but I used to be here, how do I...
And I want to be here again.
Right.
What will you help me do that?
Right.
And so we will say things like, all right, well, you're this weight now, and you used to be that weight. So where's some of those challenges? And then ask the open-ended questions. And that's when you want to throw in things like, oh, that must be difficult, that you used to be able to deadlift 400 pounds, and now you can only deadlift 300. I remember some people watching, oh man, I'd love to lift just 200 would be amazing. But again, we had to get in the mindset of some people who are searching for that last little bit, or used to be that college athlete.
Right.
And you know, I used to be able to run this fast, I was 10% body fat, etc. And I want to be there again now. And so the expressing empathy is, okay, tell me how that makes you feel. That must be difficult. Those types of questions, so that they can truly share their feelings.
Right.
And that we can respond and provide some feedback to that. The next step would be developing discrepancy. And this is where I think I spend the most amount of time. So what did you do last time you were at that 10% body fat and could deadlift 400 pounds?
Right. And the client might say something like, well, I was, working out twice a day. I had my food kind of planned and already given to me.
Exactly.
I didn't have to think about it. I was sleeping really well. I didn't have a job where, I sat all day long. So things were pretty controlled and, I was living a healthy life.
And now you have a full-time job where you sit. You're lucky to get in a 40-minute workout 4 days a week.
Right.
You have 2 kids at home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I will write some of those things on a piece of paper and sort of show them the 2 diagrams of, all right, well, these were the 6 things that you were doing to be really, really strong and really, really fit. And you're not out of shape now, but you're just not where you would like to be. And these are the things that you have going on in your life. So is it realistic for you to be 10% body fat again, given all these new things in your life? And then that's when they're like, oh,
how about that?
You might be onto something there.
Yeah.
So you want to develop that discrepancy. And then, of course, our goal isn't to lower all their goals and expectations, but do our best to bridge that and say, okay, well, how can we modify your goals, your fitness goals, and then what can we work with? And so we'll continue to talk about the positive aspects. Avoiding argument, rolling with resistance, a lot of times, or every time, a fitness change is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Something happens, and we need to know how to pick ourselves up from that and keep going forward, keep progressing.
Right. So that would be if I'm this client that wants to, lose the last 5 or 10 pounds and kind of get back to a college version of myself, then understanding that I'm going to have those days where I just couldn't get the workout in.
Right.
Life happens, and that's okay, and we're going to move on to the next day. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, don't let that derail everything else. Just pick up where you left off. Or if you can't do an hour, do 10 minutes. I think I've probably said this quote with an ACE thing before, but 10 minutes is better than 0 minutes.
Yeah.
So always reframing back to the positive.
Right.
And then that's where self-efficacy comes in. If you believe in the client and they believe in themselves, that's incredibly powerful. And so when you're creating your goals, their goals really, when you're facilitating their goals, you want to make sure that it's their idea.
Okay.
And so the whole way I like to describe motivational interviewing is somewhat like, if you remember the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where the main character wants to work in the store, and the girls are talking, they're like, yeah, but I don't think Papa will go for it. They're like, well, what if we convince him? It's like, well, we can convince him, but we have to make him think it was his idea.
Right.
And they concoct this whole story, and they're talking to him. He's like, I have an idea. You should work in the store, and I don't remember all the details, but that's what really resonates with me is we essentially present the information to the client and then say, well, what do you think? And they're like, well, in order for me to be 10% body fat and deadlift, I need to quit my job, move away from my family, cook 3 meals a day, get 9 hours of sleep.
Right.
And, halfully joking there, but you need to get them to realize that that's what it would take to get to that. So how do we, again, bridge that gap or shorten that a little bit?
Right. And one of the other things, and we're actually going to take questions here in just a few moments about this sort of aspect of behavior change. So if you are watching live right now, you can use your YouTube viewer and in the chat bar, go ahead and type your question, and we'll take some questions here in just a few moments. But one thing that we do want to talk about on this aspect of self-esteem and self-efficacy is using a ruler for change, or a change ruler is what we refer to it as in a lot of the ACE, behavior change specialist programming. And so one thing that we can use with our clients is if I'm that client that wants to make the change and I've come to you for some help and registered dietitian, some nutrition knowledge, we might ask them, how ready are you? How, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready do you feel to make this change? Clients might say 7 or 5 or whatever number they give. If you're a 7, how come you're a 7 and not a 5?
And I like that because I think where we go with our mind is, okay, you're at a 7, how do I get you to an 8, right? And then they start focusing on maybe some of their shortcomings or some of the negative things. Okay, well, why can't I be better? But if you ask them, okay, well, why are you a 7 and not a 5, then it focuses on, well, because I'm already doing this and because I have the motivation to do this on top of that. So I like that, again, reframing, creating a different mindset, focusing on the positive, I think can be very, very effective in creating those keystone habits, the 2 to 3 when they walk out the door, which again, foster, facilitate, develop a new culture and long-term behavior change.
Great. So let's take just one question here before we get into some of the hot topics for nutrition and getting a little bit more into the nutrition part of this. So as far as behavior change goes and helping clients understand that they are responsible for that change and that shift, is there anything else? We talked about journaling as one way to help clients become aware of things and the cues that might be affecting them. Is there anything else that you might recommend for clients to help in that understanding what the cue is or any other part of that habit loop? What's going on there?
It's a great question. Journaling is the first step, but again, to reiterate, I think the type of journaling that you do. We're very app-oriented and we want to put things in, but I like a pen and paper. I like handwriting. This is what's going on in my life. This is how I'm feeling. But the follow-up to that is don't just let that go into oblivion. As a trainer or a health coach, I think it's your responsibility to provide feedback. Because that's probably the most frustrating thing in the world for a client is to journal all their food and their feelings and thoughts and emotions and stresses for a week, email it to their coach, and never hear anything back.
Right.
So I would say that the assessment is only as good as what you do with the information. And that's true of any fitness testing.
Right.
You don't just test and then not modify your program based on that assessment. So when we assess, I think this follow-up to that is to make sure that we provide some sort of feedback to that.
Great, so that's perfect. So moving on into some of those hot topics, and maybe in that journaling we see that a client wants to try a new diet that is maybe popular or something that's come out recently. So in these hot topics for nutrition, we are going to be talking about intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, the vegan diet, and maybe what the common thread is there for some of those. And as a reminder for those of you that are watching, if you're a certified health and fitness professional, a health coach, personal trainer, Justin is a registered dietitian, so this would be coming from his perspective and scope of practice as a registered dietitian. Always important to remember our own scope of practice when it comes to speaking to clients about nutrition. So we're going to be sharing some of the aspects of these diets, these popular trends right now when it comes to nutrition from the registered dietitian's perspective, and then also how we can talk to our clients about if this is something that they would like to try.
Exactly, and with scope of practice, I feel that as a personal trainer, for example, it's out of your realm to write a detailed menu plan or supplement program, and definitely anything nutritionally related to a condition or disease. But if you're a personal trainer and you're not asking your clients about what they eat, you're not asking them about their outside stress or their sleep, then you're not doing your job. And I know I've said something along those lines before. So yes, it is our role to ask those questions, to see where a client's at. If they're coming into a workout and they're sluggish, hey, how did you sleep last night? Or if you have the chatty Kathy who's not very chatty today, hey, what's going on in your life? So yeah, to answer the previous question, the journaling, I think the follow-up to that is just having an adult conversation with your clients can go really, really far, and focusing on some of the outside stressors other than just their workout itself.
Great.
So yes, moving into the hot topics, I'll share some of my opinions, my elevator speech, since I get a lot of these questions on a pretty regular basis. So with intermittent fasting is also referred to as time-restricted feeding, and that's where we take a narrow window of food and beverage consumption. There's really not a specific defined aspect of it. Some people will have normal eating and then maybe fast for 24 to 72 hours, once a month, once every other month. And there's a couple different theories of how it works. One of those being gut rest, that digestion, the body needs time to heal from that. So if you increase the window from 10 hours to, 12 hours or 16 hours of not eating, that's more gut rest. The other one is that it can alter the hormones of the body a little bit, and that if you starve the body for a portion of the day, that when you do eat, you do more things with those foods. So it's interesting. It's counterintuitive to the small, frequent meals that we've all preached before, but it can be relatively effective, and we are starting to see some good results. There has not been a lot of research conducted on time-restricted feeding in athletic individuals. We know that people who are overweight or maybe have type 2 diabetes, that it has facilitated some weight loss and glucose control in those populations. But we're still, starting to chip away at the ice block as to what this could do for otherwise healthy individuals.
Right.
There's definitely an adjustment period. I know that I get very hangry after 3 or 4 hours, and so intermittent fasting for me may not be the best approach. But what I feel it does as well is if you're only eating, let's say, from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and then when you get to work at 8, you're not snacking between 8 and 11. You're not taking the little candies off of everyone else's desk. And so you're eliminating that window to consume unhealthy or junk food.
Great. So why would someone want to do intermittent fasting? And maybe we can bridge over into the ketogenic and the vegan diet as we see some of those similarities that start to come up.
Well, I'd say right now they'd want to do it because they see celebrities touting it. But that's a great question. And it's when somebody comes to you with a question, I feel the best thing that you can do is ask them a question. So if you're not a registered dietitian, you're not writing a meal plan, but if someone says, hey, what do you think about intermittent fasting? The best response you could have is, well, what do you think about intermittent fasting?
And what do you already know about it?
And what do you already know about it? Because I feel that most of the time when somebody comes to me with a question like that, they're not necessarily seeking my advice. They're seeking validation for an opinion they already have. And so you don't want to negate that. You don't want to off the cuff say intermittent fasting is stupid and lame and I don't know why anybody would ever do it. And then they say, oh, well, I've been trying it for a month and it's been fascinating. It's been amazing results for me.
Right.
So you want to ask the question, what do you think about the ketogenic diet, which we'll see in the next slide? Well, what do you think about the ketogenic diet?
Great. So let's look at that.
All
let's
right.
understand a little bit more about the ketogenic diet. And if we have clients, because this one is very popular at the moment, what is the information that we can tell them and some of the facts that we know about keto?
So the ketogenic diet is a very low carbohydrate, very high fat diet. So your total carbohydrate intake for the day is 50 grams or less, typically, which equates to about 5 to 10% of total calories. And you replace that with fat. So as you can see on the slide, 70% of your total calories coming from fat. And the theory is that if you decrease carbohydrates, that the body will turn to burning the fat that you're consuming, and maybe some of the fat that you have stored, into ketones. And so those ketones can feed the brain, and that's why it's called the ketogenic diet, because it's putting the body in a state of ketosis.
Right.
And I want to differentiate, I wrote a blog post for ACE on this, the difference between a ketogenic diet and ketone supplements that could put you into a temporary state of ketosis. Those are two completely different topics. The ketogenic diet can be effective for weight loss, glucose control, as counterintuitive as it may seem, maybe even lipid control, because we've been, it's been bashed into our brains that we need to have a low-fat diet for heart health, and that's not necessarily the case. So it can be effective, and from what I've gathered, that the reason it's effective is that we inadvertently decrease energy intake on the ketogenic diet. Most people, when they're following an ad-lib keto diet, so they're not counting calories, still end up consuming somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 calories per day.
Which is probably less than what they were doing and could lead to weight loss.
Exactly. So it's still a form, as I said, an inadvertent, indirect way of energy restriction, which we know that, it's not calorie in, calorie out. We could debate that, but energy restriction is the way to lose weight. So it can be effective for weight loss, for body fat loss. The only drawback, in my opinion, is that it's very difficult to maintain.
Yeah.
You really do have to buy into the keto lifestyle. You have to be willing to plan your meals days and weeks in advance, especially if you're going to travel, because there are not too many keto-friendly restaurants or gas stations to get snacks. So it's effective, but very, very challenging to maintain that.
Right. So intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, kind of on the other end of the spectrum is maybe the vegan diet. So let's talk about that and then maybe understand a little bit about why all three of these things seem so different, but people can still maybe have some positive results.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating to me as a dietitian, as a scientist, as a nutrition nerd, that I can have a client over here who goes on the ketogenic diet and loses 10 pounds. I can have a client over here who goes on the vegan diet and loses 10 pounds. And both are telling me that they're sleeping better, they feel better than they've ever felt, they have a ton more energy, as we've heard everybody say, yet those two implementations are completely different.
Yeah.
The vegan diet is no animal products, so it's typically very high in carbohydrate, high in fiber, relatively low to moderate amounts of fat and protein. And there are a handful of documentaries that have had some popularity lately, and how people will choose a vegan diet because they were shocked into something from there. And so a lot of those movies have some truth. You know, I do feel that it might be better for the environment on some level to choose a vegan diet, because if you think about energy loss, if I grow a pound of crops and I consume those, there's no energy loss. But if I grow 10 pounds of crops, then I feed that to an animal, and then I consume 1 pound of that animal, now I'm losing some of that energy. So you can make an argument that there are some environmental aspects to it. But in terms of what's best, it's really hard to answer that question.
Right.
And the more I learn, the more I end up spilling from the cup and realizing that I don't know all that much. So what I try to get after is, what are those common denominators that we alluded to? How can the ketogenic diet, very high fat over here, very low carbohydrate, work, and a vegan diet over here, very high carbohydrate, relatively low fat, work? And I think it comes from clean eating and the fact that when you go on a new diet plan, you're initiating new keystone habits.
Right.
That you don't just eat vegan, that you also cook your own meals, that you probably drink less alcohol, less sugary foods, less foods with preservatives. You probably do so with the family or with a friend, so you have that accountability.
Yep.
You probably start exercising more, smoking less, etc. So the first thing is that the keystone habits, the small wins, when we go on one of those, we typically make a lot of changes at once.
Right.
With the clean eating, you can throw that term around a lot, but in my opinion, that does mean making your own food, less preservatives, less additives, actual things that look and taste and feel like food versus packaged.
Right. So of all of these three kind of hot topics right now in nutrition, we might have clients that come to us and, as we mentioned before, say, what do you think about this as a registered dietitian? And we might ask them, or as a health coach even, or a personal trainer, well, you know, what do you know about it, and why is it that you're thinking about it? And then helping them maybe to understand that regardless of what they choose, because it could be that, or it could just be clean eating in general, that they choose to do as a part of their health change, that can, as you said, lead to some of those keystone habits and other changes that spread and create that environment for even more change.
And so when you begin that discussion of, all right, well, what do you think about the vegan diet? Well, what do you think about the vegan diet? What would be some of your motivations for changing what you're eating now or choosing a vegan diet? And that initiates the conversation of awareness, figuring out what they're doing now, how you make that a little bit better, how motivated they are to make multiple changes. To use the analogy of diet plans, not everybody needs to lift heavy weights, but everybody needs progressive overload in their training system. So not everybody needs to be vegan, but everybody probably needs to make a series of small changes to make their nutritional habits better. And so it, as simple as it sounds, it really does initiate from that adult conversation of, how are you doing today? Why are you wanting to make some of these changes? Going through the motivational interviewing techniques, getting buy-in from the client so that it's their ideas, essentially, that you facilitate or you nudged, and then helping them create that program. So again, it's the X's and O's, as we say, the reps, sets, routines, the foods to eat, that comes at the very, very end. And as trainers, we tend to go straight to that. And so my goal for the hour or so that we've discussed today is let's get all this stuff over here. Let's figure out who we're working with first, and then we'll figure out the what. Right,
great. So in talking about this behavior change and motivational interviewing and the habit loop that we discussed earlier, let's kind of recap and review some of those, and then we will be taking some questions as well.
So as I said 4 or 5 times now, we really want to get that awareness factor first. Isolating the cue, getting after, okay, why are you overeating? Why are you snacking late at night? Are you hungry? Are you bored? The 2 to 3 steps when a client leaves my office, again, there are probably 100 things we could work on, but I want them to focus on 2 or 3. And ironically right now, it seems like everybody I've talked to lately, it's been about sleep. Quick story without giving too much away. I was working with a client whose blood pressure has been ticking up. And so he was like, oh, well, let's talk about sodium and some of those other things. And after a few minutes, I asked him about his sleep. And he said that he typically gets to bed around 10 or 11 and is up at 2:30 or 3 in the morning and is just up from there.
No.
And so I'm like, well, of course, if you are getting 4 hours of sleep every night, that means cortisol and other stress hormones are kicking in, and the fight or flight response is kicking in, and that of course is going to drive blood pressure and heart rate. So sometimes we don't even get into the nutrition until we can talk about something like sleep. So my goal for him was, hey, let's 30 minutes before bed, his one step, his package, goodie bag as he walks out the office, is no blue light 30 minutes before bed. Simple change, but it was a nutrition session in that, okay, well, now that he makes that change, we can actually start to focus on others.
Right.
Striking a balance between the motivational techniques. Again, you want to hold a hand, you want to motivate, but you don't want to just be that passive coach who's always patting somebody on the back. And you also don't want to be that coach who's pointing the finger and fearing and shaming and guilt tripping. So it's a tough balance, and that's where the art of the coaching comes in. And once again, assessing where your client's at and determining what they need. Or on the other end, determining what your strengths are as a coach, and then really mostly working with that type of clientele. Yeah, I tend to work better with athletes. The weight loss clients, I enjoy it, but that's not where my heart is. That's not where my skills are. Being in the athlete world, that's where my skills are, and so that's what I feel I do best, and so I focus on that. The strength in numbers, working with a coach, working with a partner or a group or a team, and then just getting back to the self-efficacy of making sure that you believe in the client. I'm paraphrasing a quote here, but if you show someone that you believe in them, chances are they'll prove you right. And that's a quote from Starbucks CEO. So again, paraphrasing there, but give that client their buy-in, make them prove you right that they can make that change.
Right. So we are going to be moving into a couple of questions, and along that line of the self-efficacy and establishing that rapport and making the client feel that, or helping the client to understand that this is, you're working together as a team, right, to come up with the strategy that best works for them. One of the questions that came in earlier was around that change ruler. So if we ask the question, how likely are you, or how ready do you feel that you are going to make this change? I'm a 7. Why are you a 7 and not a 5 is how we would phrase that question to promote what we call change talk rather than sustain talk. So I can continue to talk about this, but is that something that you feel that works with clients when they start to really get into, oh, I'm defending myself now because I want to make this change? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's a fine line because you want them to defend themselves but not get defensive.
Right.
And so it's, again, I think that's just where the framing comes in, and always focusing on the positive of it. So that was actually news to me. I haven't used that slide rule. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to borrow that because we borrow everything from everybody. So I'm going to borrow that. But yeah, that positive self-talk, just keeping everything on the positive, I feel is important because you don't want them to get defensive. You want, like you said, you want them to defend themselves. Essentially reiterate why they're doing what they're doing, maybe remind them why they started this journey in the first place, and the constant reminders of what keeps them going. So with the small changes, we have like the small carrot in addition to the big carrot.
Right.
Throw that big carrot out there, wanted to run a marathon, but keep the small carrot in front of them of, hey, what can you do today? What can I help you with right now?
Yeah. So I'm going to be taking another question here from Denise. So thank you guys very much for typing in your questions. As a registered dietitian, we talked a little bit about the intermittent fasting, keto, vegan diets. As a trainer, right? Not as a registered dietitian. Clients come to us all the time with, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Right? So what's our response if somebody has already decided, as you said, they've already kind of decided what they're going to do. So as the trainer, what's our response to someone that says, I've already decided I'm going to be vegan?
So you want to make sure that you, again, with the motivational interviewing, roll with that resistance, avoid the argument. Okay, you want to do that? Well, then I'm going to help you do that in the healthiest way possible. And so again, ask them questions, provide resources. With veganism, for example, some nutrients that could potentially be a challenge would be B12 and zinc. B12 is only from animal products. So that would be something that you would have to supplement. Zinc, calcium, iron are a few others that may be concerns for people who choose to go vegan. So it might just be pointing some of those things out. What have you considered? Have you considered, how often do you travel for work? And have you considered what you have to bring with you on an airplane? So it might just be facilitating some of those, but very rarely do I ever say, no, don't do that. Even if it's not something I would personally try or recommend, or even recommend to 9 out of 10 of my clients, it's their decision. And again, we are there to create that environment for success. So if they say, I would like to do this, I would like your help, then help them. Educate them. Again, just make them aware of what the challenges and potential benefits may be of choosing that particular diet plan.
Great. And then also recommending that if they have, or if you have in your kind of network, Justin Robinson, for example, is a good network affiliate to have for a registered dietitian that I would send clients to that want to understand a little bit more about their diet and what to change. Yeah, exactly. So a way that you can actually get in touch with Justin is on your slide. If you do have some more questions regarding today's presentation, and if you would like some nutrition information, he can provide that, as well as the information that we talked about on behavior change as well. So that information is on your slide, and you can get in touch with Justin if you would like more information. If you did like today's information around behavior change and nutrition, ACE does offer a lot of other courses for this particular topic. We do have our updated fitness nutrition specialty cert or specialist program, and then we also have a couple of other courses that Justin has actually done with us at ACE as well, and you can see those on your slide, and feel free to look those up, and we'll look forward to giving you a little bit more information about this topic as well. So if we do have a couple of more questions, we'll take those now.
Awesome.
And I see that we have a couple of other people typing in and looking for those questions. So if we have a client, this is from Vito, thank you for typing in your question. If we have a client that has cardiovascular disease, known diagnoses of heart disease, and they are interested in the ketogenic diet, what is our response? I'll ask you, what is your response from a registered dietitian's perspective on that?
Awesome question. And what's interesting is that when you ask with something like ketogenic, being very specific here with heart disease, there's not a lot of research on that yet. It's more testimonial that, hey, this person's gone in this, or a handful of doctors. But I would also say that what's interesting is that if you were to ask most physicians, they would probably say that's a bad idea. And I won't go that far. So again, I would say as long as you're doing something, let's make sure you're doing it healthy. And we probably touched on this, but you can literally eat butter and bacon and be on a ketogenic diet.
Right.
Or you can have spinach and kale and olive oil and grass-fed butter and grass-fed meats, and that's a ketogenic diet. Right. So within any one of those, you can take the healthy route or the much less healthy route. So I would say two things. One, let's make sure that they're still getting some good plant sources, that they're still getting fiber and antioxidants into their diet, because that would be the most difficult things to get in on a ketogenic diet. And then I also feel that you can go a little bit in the middle and be on maybe a low carbohydrate but not ketogenic diet, and still have some of the same benefits from ketogenic that are maybe a little bit easier to maintain. So I don't want to say quite like a paleo type of diet, but along those lines where carbs are low, but not to the point where you are fully into ketosis, but where you are restricting gobs and gobs of starches and grains, and focusing on healthy fats and some greens.
Right. So making sure that the client is, because they've already decided that this is probably what they want to do, that they're doing it in a healthful way, and that you have help and support from a registered dietitian or their medical provider. So that goes into one of the other questions that we have coming in, and thank you for asking this as well. We talk about the scope of practice. We mentioned this earlier in today's presentation. The American Council on Exercise, in several of our manuals for our major certifications, offers a stance on nutrition scope of practice, and that can be found in the appendices of all of those manuals. So that is a lot of information around the nutritional scope of practice that we have as certified health and fitness professionals, which is different than the scope of practice from a registered dietitian like Justin, who's sitting here with us and talking with us today. So from the perspective of a certified health and fitness professional, such as an ACE health coach, personal trainer, group fitness instructor, or medical exercise specialist, we are allowed to provide nutritional education, talk about food journaling, give feedback, as we mentioned earlier, on that food journal.
References, resources, article posts.
Exactly, yeah, and making sure that those references and resources are from reputable sites. We have a lot of references available and resources for you at the American Council on Exercise. That's acefitness.org. And when we compare that to the scope of practice as a registered dietitian, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Right. Now, I would say the biggest discrepancy is in medical nutrition therapy, in that we go through not medical training, but we have the clinical dietetics as part of our undergraduate and in our internship program. So medical nutrition therapy is, all right, well, how does the nutrition piece apply to inflammatory bowel disease or diabetes or heart disease? So that is the one that is very, very clearly defined. But as dietitians, we go through food service and community nutrition as well as the clinical side. We go through an internship program, accredited program prior to the exam.
Great, great. So if you do have more questions around that scope of practice, be sure to check out your ACE manuals for the appendices and the scope of practice references there. So if you would like to receive, again, more information, we've got a lot of courses around this nutrition topic and behavior change coaching. If you would like to receive CECs for today's presentation, you can do so with the link provided on your screen. We'll show that link to you here in just a second. You can go to acefitness.org, and that's /past webinars. And once you receive the CECs or the recorded version rather, within your MyAce account, you can pass the quiz, and then you'll receive 0.1 CECs within your MyAce account. Also, we have another live webinar coming up next month, and we are going to be talking with one of our ACE master trainers about using the ACE IFT model for group fitness. So that is going to be a great presentation. Hope you can join us then with Garrett Stengel, one of our ACE master trainers. And Justin, thank you very much for being with us today.
I appreciate it. It was an absolute blast. So hopefully people got something that'll encourage them and give them a new keystone habit that they can foster with their clients.
Great. So if you have any other questions, be sure to get in touch with ACE. We have a variety of ways to contact us through our ACE Facebook page, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Pinterest. Thank you once again for joining us today. Let's get people moving.